Hi there, and welcome back to another episode at Station Road. Now today we continue on with the planning for the Sandling Junction layout. So we got a lot of feedback and suggestions from the first video, and it's now a case of adopting some of those suggestions and ideas into fine-tuning this layout. So once again, there's two sections to this video, and in the first section we continue on with a little bit more exploration into Railmodeller Pro and some of the features that I hadn't previously covered, and also some new techniques that kind of actually override some of the techniques I previously demonstrated. So in the second part we'll jump back to the Sandling Junction layout and take a look at some of the modifications that I've made that are based on the feedback and suggestions that have come in from the previous episode. So in order to try and keep the video length down as much as possible, of course there is some sped up footage in there as well. So I think without further ado, let's just get into what I got up to. Right, so we're back at the computer, and before we jump into the Sandling Junction layout, I just wanted to recap on the last episode relating to the Railmodeller Pro software. We were talking about creating additional curves beyond fourth radius, so fifth, sixth and so on, and of course the technique that I used in that particular little wee tutorial session. So I've since found out that there are a couple of other methods, and it was kind of a suggestion through one of the viewers who made a comment that within any rail there is a way where you can convert a straight line into a curved track with a constant radius curve. So of course I wondered whether Railmodeller Pro could do a similar process or similar task. Now the interesting thing is, of course, when we looked at the creation of a curve between two open points, and when it created the curve it wasn't a nice even curve. Now by default this is actually how Railmodeller Pro actually calculates the curve, and there are various different names for it, but basically it comes down to the easement of the curve, as you would expect in a real life situation where curves are created within the rail network. The curve is done via an easement, so it gradually eases in and gets to a slightly tighter radius curve and then eases back out again. So that's all well and good in real life, but of course in a model railway situation, unless you've got quite a large layout or a large area, easement curves or graduated curves may not be suitable. For example, as the curve becomes tighter and tighter, effectively what you're actually doing is you're at its peak or at its tightest point, the radius of the curve may be less than what the entire curve would be if it was a constant radius curve, and therefore you might end up with a tighter section within that curve, which could be limiting depending on the rolling stock and locomotives that you use. So it might not work quite so well. So we'll jump over it and I'll actually just demonstrate how that actually works and the kind of radius that you end up with one of these easement or graduated curves. So looking at the screen, of course this is our same file that I was working on from the previous episode, and what I've done is I've just created a circle that's made out of fourth radius Hornby curves. So let's say we want to join that dot to that dot, have a curve running around here. Now if I go up to the Connect with FlexiTrack option and select that and then select that point there, it creates this curve. Now we'll click apply. Now just when you look at it you realize that the software is creating this graduated curve or radius easement, or whatever you want to call it. So as it starts, it's more gradual, and then it actually gets tighter at its peak, and then it graduates back out again. Now, the theory is that you just want to create a fourth radius curve here because you don't want to have a radius in your layout that's any tighter than, say, fourth radius because of particular rolling stock or locomotives. So what I've actually done is, this is actually a piece of Hornby radius 2. So down here we can see fourth radius, the 609 is third, the 607 is 2, and the 605 is radius 1. Now if I take the 607, which is radius 2, and I pop it and just overlay it on here, we'll bring it to the front, and I'll just rotate it to sort of line up, and that's more or less laid over the top of this automatically generated graduated curve. And as you can see, at its peak, it's more or less radius 2 here, and potentially it kind of looks like it could even be down to almost bordering on dropping to radius 1. So effectively what we've done, we've taken what can be a radius 4 curve, and we've actually created a radius 2 section in it. So that's why I kind of feel that this automated easement or graduated curve that the software produces it's only really good in certain situations. So I think probably it's more suitable to much larger layouts where there's plenty of room, and the easement of the curve at its peak point, so that the section in here at its peak is still a reasonably wide radius. So I'm not overly a fan of these automated curves in here. Now, one of the other things that I did find within Railmodeller Pro that is actually quite a good feature is if we just drag in a chunk of FlexiTrack, rather than going through the process I went through where I'd created these sections by using little wee short sections of track, which I deleted later, and you can jump back to the previous video on this subject and take a look at that. But you can also do it by working out some radiuses on the curves. So with this particular function in Railmodeller Pro, we're able to take a section of straight track and set it to a specific radius curve. So as we can see, we've got our fourth radius curve here, which is the Hornby track, and then I've improvised and made a fifth radius and a sixth radius. So the fifth radius, we need to calculate out what that radius is. So if we head over to Hornby's track geometry, we can see here fourth radius is 572 millimeters, so that's out there. Now the gap between each of these radius is 67 millimeters, so essentially what we need to do is just add another 67 millimeters to this figure here, which comes in at 639 millimeters. So if we head back over to the software, and up here is where you can alter sections of FlexiTrack. So as we can see here, you can bend to a straight, so a curved piece of track can go straight, or a straight section can go curved. So if we select curved, and it curves it in a 45-degree arc. Now if we enter in the 639 millimeters, 639, and that alters that curve. Now the theory is, if I rotate this around and drag it over here, it should equal that fifth radius curve, and there we have it. And this is a constant radius, so it's not a graduated or an easement curve, it is a fixed radius. So for example, to create the next radius out, we can add another 67 millimeters to the radius, and that comes in at 706 millimeters. So if we create another curve, and we go 706. And we'll just rotate that around, and there we have that mapping onto that curve. So for example, what is the next radius out? So effectively that's 5th, 6th, what would be 7th radius, so we add another 67, I'm tapping on my calculator, 773 millimeters. So if we add in another section of straight, go to curve, and we go 773, and we'll just rotate that around, and if we move that along, and we'll might as well create another one, and there we have our 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th radius curve. So yeah, there's a number of ways of doing it, and now that I've sort of discovered that, and that was through somebody's comment saying that any rail can do that, that it's quite a nice easy way of generating a constant curve from a section of flexi track. So if we head over to Sandling Junction, now as I mentioned, we've had an awful lot of feedback, and some really positive feedback. It's absolutely fantastic, so thank you everyone for providing feedback, and it seems really there's a lot of enthusiasm from you guys as well, as much as there is with Paul and his upcoming new layout. So there was a number of really great suggestions, and some of them are quite simple and straightforward, but also in the process, while we'd produce these videos for everyone to have a look at, Paul had also submitted these plans to some people that really are sort of up with the game on track configuration, and more in terms of actual train movements and how things would actually work. And one of these people is James, and I'd just like to say a huge massive thank you to James for his input. And what he has come back with is some really quite sort of further detailed information about how things would actually work from a track plan point of view. And there's a lot of changes in here that have a considerable amount of merit, and therefore I'm quite happily going to adopt these, and Paul agrees in that sense as well. So there's a number of things in here, and I might need to sort of flick between this and the current layout plan as it stands, but straight off the bat there's a number of things that I can see that have changed, and it's mainly to do with points and crossovers, and where points and crossovers should be, where they can be added, and some other aspects as well. So one of the first ones to spot, of course, is down here. This line here was a bay platform. It came to a dead end at this end. There's the idea of actually connecting it through, and then of course it can become a passing loop as well. And yeah, that's a great idea, and definitely that will be incorporated. We've also had some track configuration alteration here. Now, one of the components that James has taken off is this third line. Now I'm going to, well, both Paul and I have agreed to retain that third line, because that does actually add the ability to have a shuttle service that can run pretty much the entire length of the main line from end to end. So that can still be incorporated. We've also got some track configuration alterations here where there's more accessibility for trains to get from, for example, the storage sidings, and they actually have access now to every single line. So that, I think I didn't have that fully covered, so that makes a lot of sense. There's also some additional access through here as well, so it really means that the hidden storage area can get to pretty much all the track. So that's certainly a big improvement, so we'll be looking at that. The next thing, which is not shown on here, but it's some discussions that Paul and I have had, and that is relating to this whole area here and how this can be altered. To extend the sidings so they're a bit longer, because some of them are really short and would actually be almost pointless. So I've got to remap how that's going to work. I think this depot area could be pushed this way a little bit further towards the right, and I think we can also bring the depot area further down and kind of twist it around in a clockwise position and bring it down a bit further, because one of the comments I think that a lot of people had made was, what is the reach like from the edge of the baseboard here to the furthest siding in the depot area? Now, I did actually calculate that out, and it's roughly about 800 millimeters from there to there. That is actually within arm's reach, so you could reach over to that, but it's not a comfortable reach. You know, it is a bit of a stretch, but it can be accessed from the front of the spaceboard. So that's another thing to consider. There's also the idea, and I think another good idea, and this is Paul's suggestion, was to have another exit line off the turntable that came down and connected to these lines down here, but also keep this one in here. But it just means that if these sidings are being occupied with movements, that locomotives can get out of the depot area and actually bypass all of this yard work in here and join on to the blue line further down. So yeah, so that's the changes that we're going to look at, and hopefully it should be reasonably plain sailing and without making this video too horrendously long. Right, so here's the plan as it is at the moment. Now what I've done is I've just taken out the platforms again, because things are actually going to change in here. But the first thing that I'm going to look at, and that relates to this area down here, is putting in this point work. So we'll start with that, and so we've got quite a simple sort of configuration here at the moment. So looking at this area, it's a case of working out some point work in here. So I think for a start we'll eliminate this. Now the other thing that we've got to consider is that everything's on an incline here, so if I go to the split view, you can actually see where we've got this incline running up. So we've got to sort of factor that into this connection here. So first of all, looking at what kind of points might fit in here, and we're going to head over to our Pico track components, and we'll go to the streamline track, and what are we looking at? What's large? We'll take a look at large. So I would say that that is reasonably okay for that. Now we can select the whole lot, and we're just going to twist it slightly, and using the arrow keys on the keyboard we can nudge this around a little bit. Right, so there's the two tracks. Now I'm just actually going to have a look at the elevation on this. So the elevation is 44.2 millimeters on that track there. This one 41.5. So what I'm going to do is put a 42 millimeter elevation on all of this. Because if we don't do this, when we do the auto connect with the track, it won't connect because of the difference in the elevation. Now we're just going to get rid of that section of track out of there. I think we could possibly get rid of that and that, and if we go to our connect with flexi track, we should be able to get a curve in here. Click apply, and we go to connect with flexi track, and click apply. Now we're just going to change all of this to white, connect with flexi, and we're going to connect in here. and we might just get rid of that curve and just do a full chunk of flexi track here. Right, so we've now got this junction in here, and then we should be able to connect another section of track from here down to here and click apply. So we've now got this track now can reconnect back onto the main line, and of course we've got a crossover here as well, and that may come in handy for various movements. So we can still have a back and forth movement of a train that stops here and maybe returns, but it can return to multiple locations. Now the next item on the agenda is in here, and there's a change in the direction of points, and of course this third line has been eliminated. Now I want to keep that third line in, but essentially what we've got is kind of this crossover and everything is going the wrong way. So what I need to do is, well, first of all we'll strip this out, that section of track, and what goes in there is a point going the other way, and we're going to keep this third line, so we'll just take that out, and we are losing that point. We'll just take that chunk out, and that crossover now goes that way instead. Now I'm not quite sure how well our point work is going to work in here. So that pretty much more or less will do the same things that this plan here does, because if that becomes a single slip, then it does away with that point and this piece of track here, because effectively you're actually coming down and through here. So the double slip there certainly eliminates that point, and this funny little short section of track which is kind of bridging that crossing area, but at the same time we're keeping this blue third line in. So at this point I thought it may be wise to speed up the footage, because essentially it turned into well over an hour's worth of trial and error. And I think that's really what this software is all about, is it does take a reasonable amount of trial and error, fitting in different components and different pieces, because your layout really at the end of the day is always going to be governed by the set pieces of track that you use, and primarily that's all your point work. So the next components, of course, were adding in some point work so that the lower fiddle yard area can access all four lines, and then I moved on to the yard and depot area, and that really did need a considerable amount of reconfiguration, because I wanted to bring everything closer to the edge of the baseboard for better reach, and also be able to create longer length sidings so that there is the opportunity to fit in longer rakes of wagons and also coaches in the station area. Right, so after quite a bit of trial and error and taking chunks of track out and adding bits of track in, we've now arrived at this updated layout, and I think this is actually working quite well now. And if we take a look back at what it originally looked like, we can see we've now got much longer sidings for goods traffic, and of course all the other changes that have been made in terms of junctions and point work to increase the accessibility of train operations. So I've also been able to bring the goods yard and the depot area a little bit closer to the edge of the baseboard, which does actually improve the reach accessibility from that point of view. So the all-important aspect is to also look at train lengths and what we can actually fit into the layout. So I've overlaid some scale Mark 1 coaches, and there's the green representing a locomotive, this being a Class 37, and then we've got a Class 08, and we've just got some 12-ton box fans as well in one of the sidings. And as you can see, there's certainly a reasonable amount of room. We can operate a 7-coach train, or anywhere between 5 and 7 coach trains. You could go longer, but at least that's what actually covers where there'll be some platforms. And as you can see in the yard area, there's a lot more room in there, and I think this layout is now really quite close to a good working layout with plenty of options and plenty of operational enjoyment and a reasonable amount of flexibility. So there we have it for the current layout rendition, and I think we're certainly getting very close to locking this layout down and starting to get ready for planning framework and baseboard sections. So once again, it'll be great to get your feedback and suggestions on where the layout stands at the moment. So don't forget to head over to Paul's channel, where obviously he'll be putting up a video with his take and perspective on this new updated layout. So I'll sign off for now. Do take care, everyone. Look after yourselves. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will catch you next time. Bye for now.